It was early morning when the old man showed up at the front steps of the VA hospital. He was wearing a faded jacket that had once been part of a uniform, and his boots, though polished, carried the weight of years. In his hands he held a folder of documents, neatly stacked and carefully guarded. To anyone else, he might have looked like someone's grandfather, quiet, slow, maybe even lost. But beneath the wrinkles and worn-out clothes was a man who had once served with pride, someone who had stood firm when it mattered most. That day, though, he wasn't greeted with gratitude. He was told to leave. It started with a misunderstanding, at least, that's what people would later say. Maybe it was a shift change. Maybe someone at the front desk hadn't looked closely enough at the paperwork. Or maybe, and more truthfully, it was something else. A snap judgment. A quick glance that didn't see a veteran, just an old man without an appointment. "You're not on the list," the clerk said, barely making eye contact. The man tried to explain that he had come to update his records, that he'd called ahead, that someone told him to come in person. But none of it seemed to matter. Rules were rules. "You'll have to come back another time," they said. "You can't be here today." He stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do next. Other people moved around him, nurses, visitors, a few younger vets in baseball caps. No one really stopped to look. It's easy to miss someone who moves slowly. Easier still when that person doesn't raise their voice or make a scene. But someone did notice. Across the lobby, behind the thick glass of an upstairs window, the director of the facility happened to be walking by. It's strange how timing works sometimes, how a single moment, if caught, can change everything. He paused, looking down at the lobby, just as the old man was turning to leave. Something about his posture caught the director's attention. He didn't see anger. He saw disappointment, quiet, heavy, and deeply familiar. The director had spent decades working in veteran care, and before that, he had worn the uniform himself. He knew the look of someone who had been brushed aside one too many times. Without a word, he turned from the window and headed for the stairs. Down in the lobby, the old man had made it to the door. His hand was on the handle when he heard footsteps behind him. He turned slowly, expecting maybe another staff member telling him again that he had to leave. Instead, he saw a man in a dark blue suit walking toward him, not rushed, not flustered. Calm, steady. Like he'd made this walk before. "Sir?" the director said, stopping just a few steps away. "Would you mind walking with me for a moment?" The old man hesitated. "They told me to leave," he said quietly. "Said I wasn't on the list?" "I heard," the director replied. "But I think we can fix that." What happened next didn't make headlines. It wasn't caught on video or shared across social media. There was no applause, no dramatic music. Just a simple gesture, one that said more than words ever could. The director extended his arm. And the old man, after a pause, took it. Together, they walked past the front desk. No one stopped them this time. No one told the man he didn't belong. Because someone with authority had seen him, not just with his eyes, but with respect. This wasn't just about a visit or a mistake in scheduling. It was about something bigger. About how easily we forget the ones who gave so much. About how many veterans, especially older ones, slip through the cracks. And about how one moment of humanity can stand up against 1,000 small indignities. The staff at the desk said nothing as the two men passed. A few people watched quietly, sensing that something important was happening, even if they didn't understand the details. The director guided the man into his office, shut the door, and sat him down. What followed was a conversation, long, honest, and overdue. But we're not there yet. Because before that door closed, before the director sat across from the man and began to ask him about his life, his service, his needs, something else happened. A moment, brief and almost invisible, that said everything. As they walked down the hallway together, the old man gripped the director's arm a little tighter. Not because he needed support, but because for the first time in a long while, he felt like someone truly saw him. He didn't need much. Just someone to listen. Someone to care. And maybe, just maybe, someone who remembered that the uniform doesn't come off when the war ends. So what did the old man say when he sat down in that office? What truth had he come to share? What story had gone unheard for too long? And why, when the meeting was over, did the director call an emergency staff gathering that would change how the entire facility treated its veterans from that day on? That's where we'll go next. Because the story isn't over yet. The office door clicked shut behind them, muting the noise of the busy hallway. The old man sat down slowly, resting the folder on his lap like it held something sacred. The director didn't rush him. He poured 2 cups of coffee, set one in front of the man, and sat across the desk with a quiet patience that said, "Take your time." The room was still. Outside, the day went on as usual: appointments, check-ins, the buzz of 1,000 small routines. But in that office, it felt like time had paused. "My name's Walter," the old man finally said, his voice low and steady. "Walter Jenkins." The director nodded. "It's good to meet you, Mr. Jenkins. I'm John. I'm the facility director here. And I'm sorry about what happened out there." Walter gave a small shrug, as if he'd grown used to it. "I've been trying to get this paperwork sorted for a long time. Thought maybe if I brought it in, face to face, someone would finally take a look. My records, they're all messed up. Said I never served. Said I don't exist in the system." John leaned forward, interest sharpening in his eyes. "What branch did you serve in?" "Army," Walter replied. "Vietnam. 1970 to 73, 101st Airborne." There was a silence that followed. John had heard hundreds of stories over the years. He knew how common these kinds of mistakes could be: records lost, names misspelled, claims denied. But something about the way Walter said it, the calm certainty, made him pay closer attention. "I had a buddy who was in the 101st, John said. "He didn't talk about it much." Walter nodded slowly. "Most of us don't." He opened the folder then, his hands trembling just slightly. Inside were a few yellowed documents, old military forms, a faded photograph, a discharge paper so worn you could barely read the print. There were notes in pen along the margins, addresses crossed out, phone numbers that likely hadn't worked in years. "I've sent this stuff in 3 times, Walter said. "Once to DC, once to the regional office, and once to here. Never heard back. Then I got a letter saying my claim was denied. Said I'd never served. Said there's no record of a Walter Jenkins from Chicago in any unit." John frowned, gently taking one of the papers from the folder. He scanned the name, the numbers, the unit code. Something didn't add up. "You ever go by a different name?" he asked. Walter shook his head. "Nope. But my cousin, he got drafted too. Same last name, same city. We were both in country around the same time. I wonder if someone crossed our files way back then." John sat back, his mind working through the possibilities. He'd seen files misfiled under siblings, twins, even neighbors. And once something like that happens, it can be near impossible to fix, unless someone really digs. "You're telling me you've been denied care because of this?" he asked. Walter gave a dry smile. "Denied care. Denied pension. Denied recognition. I come here every few months hoping someone will see I'm telling the truth. They never do." John looked at the man in front of him. His clothes were clean but worn. His face was weathered, but his eyes were sharp. This wasn't just a man fighting paperwork. This was a man fighting to prove he existed. Then John asked something simple. "Why keep trying?" Walter looked at him, no bitterness in his face, just quiet conviction. "Because I earned it. And because I promised a man, a long time ago, that I'd come back and tell his family what happened. I never did. I lost everything after the war. I don't want to disappear before I make it right." John stared at him, feeling a weight settle in the room. This wasn't about a missed appointment, or a clerical error. This was a man standing on the edge of being forgotten, and refusing to fall. But what Walter didn't know was that someone had already been digging through old files. And what they were about to find would not only change Walter's story, it would shake the whole system. And someone else didn't want that story to come out. John didn't say much at first. He sat there with the folder open in front of him, flipping through the thin stack of papers like they were pieces of a puzzle missing half the edges. He'd seen a lot of broken systems in his years at the VA, but something about this felt deeper. Too many things didn't line up. If Walter's story was true, and John had every reason to believe it was, then this wasn't just a filing error. This was a man who had been erased. "I'm going to look into this myself," John said, finally breaking the silence. "Not just the paperwork. Everything." Walter nodded, like he'd heard promises before. "Appreciate it," he said, though his voice carried the weight of someone who wasn't expecting much to change. What neither of them knew was that downstairs, a young intern named Sarah had overheard the front desk conversation earlier. She'd been standing near the copier when Walter was turned away. Something about it didn't sit right with her. She'd seen it before, older veterans confused by the system, turned away because their stories didn't match what was in the computer. But this one stuck with her. Later that afternoon, she quietly pulled up the internal VA database. She didn't have high-level access, but she could see basic case histories. Walter's name came up with a red tag, discrepancy in service record. Denied benefits. Flagged for possible fraud. Fraud? Sarah stared at the screen, unsettled. That word didn't fit the man she saw earlier. Something else caught her eye, a note entered into the file just 6 months ago. It was short: "Do not process further claims without senior review. Refer any inquiries to compliance." Compliance? She hadn't seen that tag on many files before. Usually it showed up in rare cases, complicated cases involving legal issues, or worse, cover-ups. Back in John's office, Walter sat quietly while John began making calls. He reached out to an old contact at the regional archives, someone who had helped him once before with another lost service record. As he waited for a callback, he began jotting down notes, sketching out the timeline Walter had told him. But something still felt off. "Walter," John said, looking up. "That buddy you mentioned earlier, the one you made a promise to. What was his name?" Walter hesitated. "James Rivers. We were in the same platoon. He didn't make it back. I tried to find his family after I got home, but things got messy." John wrote the name down. It wasn't just about finding the family now. It was about verifying Walter's presence in Vietnam through someone else's record. Buddy's statements had helped in the past. If he could find James Rivers in the archives, there might be a mention of Walter in the unit reports. But just as he was getting deeper into the notes, his phone buzzed. A message from his contact: "John, something strange. Walter Jenkins shows up in a unit file, but it's sealed. Classified. Only redacted versions available. That's not normal for regular service records." John's eyes narrowed. This just got more complicated. He glanced at Walter, who sat quietly sipping his coffee, unaware of the storm beginning to form around him. Why would a regular soldier's file be sealed? Why would the system flag him for fraud instead of looking deeper? And more importantly, who didn't want Walter's story to be found? That question hung heavy in the room. Because somewhere, someone had gone to great lengths to bury this man's past. And if John kept digging, there was no telling what he'd uncover. John stared at his phone, the message from his contact still glowing on the screen. Sealed file. Redacted. Those words echoed in his mind like a warning. He looked back at Walter, who was slowly folding the empty coffee cup, his hands quiet, calm. But John could feel it now. There was more to this man's story than a simple clerical error. And whatever was hidden in those sealed files, someone had gone to great lengths to keep it buried. He stood up suddenly, needing air, needing space to think. "Walter," he said, trying to sound steady. "I'll be right back. Just going to make a call." Walter nodded without looking up. John stepped out into the hallway, pulled out his phone again, and called the archives office directly. It rang twice before a tired voice answered. "Tom, it's John. I need to know, why is that file sealed? Jenkins wasn't intel or special forces." Why would a regular infantryman's record be classified? There was a pause on the other end. Then, quietly, "That's the thing, John. We don't know. But someone put a level 3 block on it. That's not normal. Those are usually tied to ops that went off the books, or when names had to be hidden. But he's not listed under any covert programs." John felt a chill run down his spine. What if they got his name wrong in the system? What if they buried the wrong Jenkins? "I checked that," Tom replied. "His social, his service number, they match what little info we can see. But the rest? Redacted even to us. It's like someone erased the details on purpose." John ended the call and leaned against the wall, the weight of the situation finally setting in. If Walter's file was sealed, someone high up had to sign off on that. But why? And why flag him for fraud instead of quietly fixing the mistake? Meanwhile, downstairs, Sarah was still at her desk. She couldn't shake the feeling that something dangerous was underneath all of this. On a hunch, she opened an internal case log system and searched for Jenkins again. A new entry had just been added. No details, just a code: audit initiated. Flag for review. Notify legal if reopened. She stared at it, heart pounding. This wasn't just an old case being reopened. Someone knew it was being looked at again. And someone didn't like it. Back upstairs, John re-entered the office and found Walter looking out the window. "I have to ask," he said gently. "Is there anything you didn't tell me? Anything about your time over there that might have caused someone to cover up your records?" Walter didn't move for a long time. Then he turned slowly. "There was a mission. Something we were never supposed to see. Some of us didn't come back. The ones who did, we were told to forget it ever happened. I tried. But I wrote it all down. It's in a journal. Locked up at home." John's pulse quickened. "Do you still have it?" Walter nodded. "But I haven't opened it in years." Then, without warning, the office phone rang. John picked it up. A cold voice on the other end said, "Stop looking into Jenkins. For your own good." And the line went dead. John stood frozen with the phone still in his hand, the dial tone humming like static in his ear. Whoever that was, whoever knew he was digging, had access to his office line. That wasn't just someone playing games. That was a warning. A threat. He slowly placed the receiver back in the cradle, trying not to let Walter see the shift in his expression. But Walter was already watching him closely. "They called you, didn't they?" Walter said, not even asking, just knowing. John hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah." Said to stop looking into your case. Walter let out a soft, bitter chuckle. "They're still watching. After all this time." John sat back down. "Walter, what exactly was in that mission? What could they possibly be protecting after 50 years? Walter looked away, jaw clenched. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you. But I'll show you. We'll go to my place. I'll give you the journal. If they're already calling, it means they know we're close." Before John could respond, Sarah burst through the office door, her face pale, eyes wide. "You need to see this," she said, holding up her tablet. "I just checked the security logs. Someone accessed Jenkins' file from an outside terminal 5 minutes ago, remote access. And it didn't come through our system. It's being rerouted." John stood up immediately. "From where?" Sarah shook her head. "Can't trace it. It's like it bounced through 6 servers and vanished. But it was definitely a live connection. Someone was inside the file just now." Walter's face had gone still, but his voice was calm. "They're trying to wipe it clean. Permanently this time." John looked between them, something tightening in his chest. If they lost access to that file, the last chance to validate Walter's service, and the story buried with it, might disappear for good. But even worse, if someone was watching their moves in real time, they could be in danger. That's when the second twist hit. Sarah's phone buzzed. She glanced down, and her face went pale again. "Sir, there's a vehicle in the staff lot that's not registered. No plates. It's parked near your car." John moved to the window and looked down. Sure enough, a black SUV sat quietly at the edge of the lot, windows tinted too dark to be legal. No VA tag. No government sticker. Just sitting there. He stepped back from the window slowly. We're going now, Walter said firmly. We can't wait. John nodded. Let's take the back stairwell. We'll go together. Before they left, John turned to Sarah. Lock your station. Wipe your search history. And don't talk to anyone about this. Not yet. Sarah nodded, her face pale but determined. I'll cover for you. As they slipped out the back exit, tension thick in the air, John couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed, by more than just people. That this wasn't just about a forgotten vet anymore. This was something bigger. And whatever was in that journal Walter kept hidden, it held answers someone very powerful didn't want found. The drive to Walter's house was tense and silent. John kept glancing in the mirror, half expecting that black SUV to reappear, but the road stayed empty. Walter sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window with a calm that only came from living through worse. When they pulled up to a small, weathered house tucked at the edge of a quiet neighborhood, Walter didn't wait. He stepped out and moved straight to the front door. Inside, everything was neat, untouched, like time had frozen. Walter led John to a back room and pulled a small lockbox from the bottom of a closet. His hands didn't shake as he opened it, and pulled out a worn leather journal, pages yellowed with time. He handed it to John. You'll find the names, the location, the day everything went wrong. I wrote it the week I came home, Walter said quietly. They told us never to speak of it again. But I couldn't forget. John flipped through the journal. What he found made his stomach twist. The mission hadn't just been secret, it had gone horribly wrong. A civilian village had been mistaken for a military site. Orders had been rushed. People had died. And the surviving soldiers were silenced with threats, their records sealed, some even reassigned under new names. Walter had refused to sign the last page of the official report. And for that, he was erased. John looked up, heart pounding. This is proof. This changes everything. Before Walter could answer, a loud knock slammed against the front door. They both froze. John moved to the window, barely lifting the curtain. The black SUV was in the driveway now. Two men in dark suits stood at the door, one holding what looked like a folder. Walter stepped forward. They won't hurt us. Not with you here. But John wasn't so sure. He slipped the journal into his coat and opened the door. One of the men spoke calmly. We're not here to cause trouble. We just want to collect a document that doesn't belong to Mr. Jenkins. John met his eyes. He wrote that with his own hands. It belongs to him. The man paused. Then he should understand. Some truths were buried for a reason. But Walter stepped forward and looked the man square in the eye. You can bury records. You can seal files. But you can't bury what's in here, he said, tapping his chest. The men didn't respond. They turned and walked back to the SUV. John let out a breath. The journal was safe. The truth was in his hands. But when he got back to the VA the next morning, his ID badge wouldn't scan. His access had been revoked. John stared at the security gate, his badge useless against the locked door. The VA had shut him out, an unspoken message that the deeper he dug, the more trouble he was stirring. But instead of fear, John felt a quiet determination growing inside him. Walter's story, the hidden mission, the sealed records, all of it mattered. This wasn't just paperwork or protocol. This was about justice for a man who had been erased by a system that should have protected him. He took a deep breath and reached for his phone. First, he called Sarah. We're not done, he said. This goes beyond one man. There's a cover-up here, and we need to get the truth out, carefully. Sarah's voice was steady, even if nervous. I've already started gathering files, backup copies. We have to be smart, but we can't let them bury this. Walter, meanwhile, was back at his home, no longer alone in his fight. The journal was no longer just a memory locked away, it was a testament. A reminder that real heroes aren't just in the history books, but in the quiet courage of those who never gave up. The mission that had been buried in silence for decades was finally starting to see the light. The names of those lost, the mistakes made, the sacrifices forgotten, they were all coming back into view. John knew the path ahead would be difficult. There would be resistance. But the first step was taken. In the end, it wasn't just about proving Walter Jenkins served. It was about honoring every veteran whose story was tangled in red tape, lost records, and forgotten promises. It was about reminding the world that courage doesn't disappear just because someone tries to hide it. As John looked out over the VA grounds from a distance, he thought about the countless veterans still waiting to be heard. And he promised himself, and Walter, that he would keep fighting. Because every veteran deserves more than paperwork, they deserve to be remembered. And sometimes, it takes one old man's story to change everything.